Montezuma's Revenge, Flipscreen platforming, American style. It's 1200 XL, episode 2. Hi, everybody. Welcome to 1200 XL.
And I'm
John. And today, Aaron, we're going to be talking about Montezuma's Revenge. Aaron, how do you feel about Mexican food?
Right. I've turned the corner, Boat. There was a time where I just couldn't stand it. But then I went to Mexico, and something happened down there. I guess I was exposed to the really good stuff. And it's also, I also used to hate tequila. So there you go. Also went to Mexico, and now I love tequila, and I do like Mexican food. It's not like I can eat everything, but I do like a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think also, as time has gone on, I feel like the Mexican food, at least in my mind, it's gotten better. As I've shifted away from just eating Taco Bell and thinking that was Mexican food, and actually going to Mexican restaurants. I discovered that really I don't dislike Mexican food. I just dislike Taco Bell. That is by far my least favorite chain. Although if you need to get full and you don't have a lot of money, it's the best.
I don't hate Taco Bell, but I don't know. I can't remember if have you been to Mexico before proper?
No, I've never been to Mexico.
One of the few foreign countries I've been to. And it's just, I love Mexico. I love the people down there. They're super duper nice. A beautiful bunch of people and friendly. And when I was down there, it was so much fun. And the restaurants we ate at were so nice. Now, these were the restaurants they would take the corporate American, like, goofs to. We went to a couple just like off the cuff restaurants. It was great. The food was outstanding. Fresh and delicious, and I just loved it. And so I kind of keep that thought in my mind when I'm having the Taco Bell. It's like, well, this isn't quite going to cut it. Now, when I visited Houston, they've got just outstanding Mexican cuisine down there as well. It really does. Mexican food, I guess every type of food, it varies. If you want a 5-star hamburger, you don't go to McDonald's. It's same thing with Mexican food. So, but I have turned a corner. The Mexican cuisine, especially when they bring it out in big buffet style. God, it was the best. But I've never gotten past it, man.
Do you have a go-to favorite whenever you head down to the Whiskey Taco?
It's well, I like I like the big burritos, of course. They've got this stuff. Is it choza? Something like that. Sort of like a sausage.
It's like ham
and
or
I
sausage.
really like that, mixed in. So that's something else I really enjoy. I a little bit of everything. I'm not a huge greenery guy, but I will say that Mexican food also is probably, I'm the one person that Mexican food is probably healthier for than my normal everyday food.
I'm a big fan of the fajitas. I like when they bring out the plates and you sort of construct your own thing, and then you just jam it right in your face.
I like getting the pineapple in there. They've got those kind of Hawaiian. That's good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's good eating. Well, Aaron, let's leave this riveting discussion about our favorite Mexican foods and talk about this week's game, Montezuma's Revenge.
Which is associated with not a happy dining experience. Right. It's funny, when we were down in Mexico, they always told us, it's like, listen, don't drink the water down here. You've heard that before. Because there's stuff in the water that the locals are used to that our stomachs aren't. And they used to make that a point to always bring in your own water and stuff. And it's funny, my buddy went down there. He brought his own drinks and stuff down, and he still ended up getting sick. And it turns out he'd been using the ice. They didn't put two and two together. So Montezuma's Revenge was not a fun thing for him. That's for darn sure.
Yeah. Conversely to the digestive Montezuma's Revenge, the game Montezuma's Revenge is awesome. So this game was released in the wonderful year of 1984. This is the year when I really feel like arcade machines reached perfection. Yeah. You were right on the cusp. I believe that the crash happened towards the end of 1984. So everything was firing all cylinders. You had, all the first generation consoles were out there. The Atari 8-bits were really rocking and rolling. This was a great time to be around and to be a video game player. This thing was published by Parker Brothers. Parker Brothers, of course, probably most famous for being in the board game
Yeah.
business, although I believe that they sold their stake to Hasbro. I don't think Parker Brothers exists as a company anymore, but forever and ever, they were always the company behind. I think they made Monopoly. I think they made Clue. Is that what you think of when you think of
Well,
Parker Brothers?
I do think of that, but I also do think that they did a lot of game stuff. I know
Yeah.
that they did. I believe that they published, among other things. I think Frogger was one they published, and I remember Empire Strikes Back. I think was one of theirs.
Parker Brothers, because unlike most publishers, they had the wealth of the traditional toy business behind them. They could really seek out the really high profile either licensees like the Star Wars games or arcade conversions. So they were the ones that published Frogger, they published Cubert, they published Popeye. All of these games came out under the Parker Brothers label on
Yeah,
home computers and probably a lot of
yeah,
consoles and stuff too. So they had the jack to get the job done, and that they also paid really well. So they published the game, but it was written by a guy named Robert Jager. Okay, officially, I believe on the cart or on the title screen it says developed by Utopia
right.
Software, but Utopia Software was really Robert Jager and his dad. Robert Jager is he is the classic example of a bedroom programmer. You hear about these guys all the time in the UK, the Oliver twins and all those guys, but we had them too in America, and Robert Jager was one of them. His first computer was the Bally Astrocade.
We're
Remember that
covering
one,
that on
Aaron?
ARG next week, ironically. Yes, we are.
Really? What provenance? So he got the Astrocade when he was 11 or 12, and he immediately started writing games on it. So he's one of these kids that sees the potential in writing games, and that excites him much more than just sitting around playing games like me and you. He started writing games immediately in assembly. Or no, I think he started in BASIC. And when he was 11 or 12, he started getting games published in the Bally Astrocade magazine. So can you imagine being an 11 or 12-year-old kid and having published full listings of programs in
Yeah,
this magazine?
that's
Pretty
awesome.
incredible. Yeah. So after a while he saw the writing on the wall for the Astrocade. He saw that it was starting to age, and he really wanted to get into the Atari computers. He saw the potential in the Atari. He saw how much more advanced it was than the Astrocade. And so he got his parents to buy him an Atari 800. And immediately he went to work. He went to work. His first commercially released game, Aaron, he was 14 years old. It was called Chomper, and it wasn't a clone of Pac-Man. It was more like an homage of Pac-Man, where it was Pac-Man had to do other things besides just avoid ghosts. So it wasn't a direct ripoff, but his mistake was that he made the main character look exactly like Pac-Man. And as a result of that, no major publishers wanted to touch it because they were afraid of getting sued. So he got it published through a small local mom and pop type publisher, and that was sort of his entry into the world of games. And so it did okay. Just like most publisher or most developers you talk to, they don't make a lot of money because everybody owns the game, but nobody buys the game, if you
Oh
know what I'm
yeah.
saying. So anyway, but he made just enough money to keep going. So his next project was called Pinhead, Aaron, and this is not the Pinhead from the Hellraiser.
Stupid
Fortunately.
character. I always thought that was the least impressive character, bad guy. Here comes Pinhead, run! Pinhead's after you. So
You're not
kidding me,
wrong.
Pinhead?
You're not wrong. Well, this was another homage to the arcade game Kickman. Have you played Kickman?
Yeah,
Aaron?
yes, actually, I have played Kickman. You talking about the clown on the unicycle? Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that game.
that's right.
Absolute great game.
Yeah, it is. It didn't really light the arcade world on fire, but it's one of those games that you go back to, and it should have did better than it did because it's actually a really fun game. So anyway, he wrote Pinhead, and he was getting ready to publish it, but at the same time, he really wanted to do something that was like a showcase of everything that the Atari 800 could do at the time, or the Atari, line of computers could do. And so he started working on this project, and he got the idea of the project from his friend. And his friend basically said, why don't you make a game about starring a with a Mesoamerican theme called Montezuma's Revenge? And he's like, all right, that sounds good.
Like,
Apart from that, that was all that
That's
that was
crazy.
all the push that he needed. So anyway, he went on and created Montezuma's Revenge, and he was working on it, and he had the game mostly done. And at this point, his dad saw, okay, obviously my kid's got talent. He actually arranged for a booth, or part of a booth. It was actually more of a table, I think, hearing him tell the story of at CES. Okay, so they were actually sharing a booth with a blank VHS tape manufacturer. So you can imagine that. But anyway, he brought he brought Pinhead with him, and he brought Montezuma with him. And obviously, when Parker Brothers sauntered by, they didn't give Pinhead the time of day, but they really liked Montezuma. They thought this was a great game, and they loved to publish it. So, luckily, unlike so many developers, Robert and his dad actually negotiated a licensing agreement, which allowed the license to revert back to Robert and his dad, back to Utopia after a certain amount of time, and also pays royalties on all the different versions of Montezuma that were sold. So every Atari 2600 version, every ZX Spectrum version. Yeah. So this ended up, I mean, he didn't get rich out of the deal, but again, he was 16 years old. And when you're 16, relatively small amounts of money seem like $1 million. So he made himself enough money to buy himself a brand new Pontiac Trans Am for his 17th birthday. I mean, so he was living the good life. But the problem was that he was sort of an introvert. He didn't like to talk about, he didn't. Everybody wanted to interview him, all the local news and everything, and he regrets a little bit the fact that he didn't really sell himself more during this time period, because if he could have achieved the same sort of cachet that a group like the Oliver Twins did. I mean, obviously the Oliver Twins were like the polar opposite, where you can find all kinds of news clippings and TV interviews with them when they were kids, and they used that to catapult their image. Their image became just as big of a selling point as the game. And with Robert, unfortunately, things didn't go that way. Lots of things conspired against Robert, actually. It was basically, you had right after, Montezuma, you have the fall of '84, you have the big crash. Everybody's getting out of games. And also, you're also reaching the end of kind of the commercial lifespan in the United States of the 8-bit Atari computer. By 1985, the ST was coming out, and everybody was focused on the future. Robert wanted to continue on in the future. He actually bought a Commodore Amiga when it was released, because he was blown away by the graphical prowess. Obviously, if you look at an Amiga compared to an Atari 800, it's like night and day in terms of the graphical fidelity. He did start a couple projects, but he never finished them. By this time, he went into college, and he actually went on to have a pretty successful career in the financial industry, doing different financial technology programming and things like that. So he ended up doing okay. He still has lots of fond memories of Montezuma's Revenge, and actually he released a game for the Game Boy Advance and the PC. Another Montezuma's game, and it unfortunately it didn't do too well. This was a thing where he basically just gave somebody the name, and he started out with the concept. By the time it was finished, it didn't it didn't really match what he thought it would be, and it just kind of blew away. So anyway, that's some background on Robert Jager and kind of the creation of Montezuma's Revenge. But let's talk about the game Montezuma's Revenge. What is this game? Now, Aaron, you're sort of an expert when it comes to these flip screen platformers. Not only do you know a lot about them, but you actually enjoy them. So, Aaron, tell us about what you do in Montezuma's Revenge.
I don't know if I'd call myself an expert, Bo, but I do enjoy them. That's for darn sure. I think you summed this up real well in your open when you mentioned this being the American answer to the flip screen adventure platform, because that's exactly what this is. You play as Panama Joe, which He gets named on some of the boxes, and on some of the boxes he doesn't get named. But you are basically an explorer, and you're going down through the pyramid here to get Montezuma's treasure. Now, as you go through the all these different levels, you're going to come across doors that need to be opened, which means you have to find the keys. And you're going to find enemies you have to vanquish, so occasionally you'll have to find a sword. But for the most part, you're dodging and jumping across chasms and platforms that appear and reappear, avoiding bouncing skulls and spiders on your way down through the obstacles. It's a great game. And one of the things that make it so much fun is the exploration aspect of it. It's just fun to go down through all the different levels. The levels are real cleverly done. But this isn't a game like, say, a Flipscreen like you would play like a, something like a Manic Miner, where it's like so blindingly difficult that you just repeatedly get killed over and over. I feel like this game gives you a fair shake when you go through these levels. You can tell what you're supposed to do. You can see it, and you're not totally bombarded. This is like the thinking man's version of those sorts of games, where you've got some time to contemplate your moves as you navigate through.
And one of the interesting stories about the development of this game is it wasn't always the case. Originally, Robert Jaker programmed a bat to enter and sort of move you along if you were taking too long to determine your way through a particular screen. However, that was one of the things that Parker Brothers took out of the game in order to save space so they could fit it on a smaller cartridge. I think that this game is one of the things that makes it different than the Jet Set Willy or Manic Miner, a game like that, is that you have the jumps are not nearly as precise. You have a lot more wiggle room in terms of the jumps. A lot of times they make the jumps more difficult by putting in conveyor belts. So you have to take those movements into consideration. But the biggest thing is that there's just not as much stuff to contend with. Even if you hit an enemy and you die, that enemy disappears. Yes. And you don't have to deal with the enemy anymore. So this is, I don't think it's necessarily correct to call it a thinking man's, flip screen platformer, because you definitely have to do a lot of thinking in Manic Miner. But it's less just like rote memorization of exact combinations of moves to get through it.
And it's more, it runs at a pace where you can sit back and consider your travels through this maze.
Right, and much more emphasis is placed on exploration. In a game like Manic Miner, you're working your way from the beginning to the end. In this game, you have to backtrack, you have to do different things. It's almost more like Dizzy in that regard, if we're making comparisons to British style games. Although it is much more, the platforming is much better than it is in the Dizzy games.
Well, Dizzy is a lot more puzzle oriented as well.
Yeah.
What this reminds me of, to a certain degree, is like your basic old school first edition of Pitfall, in a lot of ways.
Yes.
If you take these screens as single screens and look at the obstacles, you're jumping over snakes, you're jumping over items that move, you're jumping over items that don't move, you're jumping over pits, stuff like that. And the comparison I could see to a sort of like an original Pitfall. You'll also go down into parts of the pyramid where it'll be dark. There won't be any lights. That gets real tricky down in that area when you're trying to navigate your way through. Now, I had mentioned earlier, this week was the first time I successfully got to the treasure. I'd never done it before. In all the years I've been playing this game. And it's funny because I just sat down. I don't play games like I used to. I've always been a guy who just picks up a stick and just runs in like an idiot. And I actually sat down, and as I played this, I'm like, okay, I always don't have the keys I need. Where are the keys I need? Where do I need to go? And once you understand where everything is, and you understand what you need to unlock, it really did. It sort of opened the game up for me, so I could tell where I was supposed to go. But aside from the thinking aspects of just trying to make a plan as to where you need to get keys from, the jumping elements in this are great. And one of the things that make it great are the spot-on controls. This isn't going to be one of those games where you complain about the looseness of the stick or any sort of delay. This game is very tight with its controls, and you're doing a lot of kind of nutty stuff. Aside from jumping on just normal platforms, you're running over conveyor belts. You're jumping on and off things that disappear. You're going on ropes. You're jumping from rope to rope. You're going up and down ropes that are on fire. So the ropes are going away. And so there's a lot of variety there that makes the game interesting. And you sort of feel like an Indiana Jones or something as you're rolling that deeper and deeper into these tombs, because you really don't know what to expect, which that's all part of the fun.
Yeah. Now, speaking of what to expect when you play this game, if you didn't own the original cartridge back in the day and you are playing this via emulation, you've got to be careful about which version you're actually playing, because there are two versions of the game out there. There is the officially released 16K cartridge version of the game, which of course has been dumped by now, and that's the Parker Brothers released version. And then there's an unreleased prototype version of the game. This is the version of the game that was shown at CES. And these two games have very significant differences. One difference is that the original version, the CES version, has a really nice animated title screen. Whenever you get an extra life, a big extra life thing pops up, and it's a very cool sort of a cool sort of effect. Not unlike when you get an extra life in a Universal game. It's almost like a little cutscene, although it's not animated. There's also an opening theme. I believe it's Spanish Flea by Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. Yes. That, of course, is not present in the 16K cartridge version. But the biggest difference is that the prototype version actually features a boss battle with a large, Mesoamerican statue. And unfortunately, because it was a demo version, Robert didn't actually program a way to beat the boss. He couldn't. He hadn't gotten that far yet. And of course, he was asked to actually make a game that was less than the prototype that he made, so it would fit within those space constraints. So the prototype version is in fact unbeatable.
That's it's funny. I have not seen that boss until we were watching some of the prototype footage earlier. And that's crazy. I was like, wow, look at that nutty thing. So that's neat. It's weird that the prototype is more than what got released, but you can understand it in terms of compressing it onto a cartridge. That much said, the stuff that they ditched, it doesn't affect the overall fun of the game. No. The little Spanish Flea song will play when you do certain things in the game. Also, one of the things I like, the little touch when Panama Joe falls on his head and his little legs are like spring around.
It's very comical. Yeah, it's very comical. This is a game that has those little touches, and this is a very, I almost consider this to be a Japanese style game in terms of the amount of detail that they put in, the little animations, the little musical cues. It's actually La Cucaracha that plays whenever you pick up an item in this game. And the way that this game controls, it's like a prototype for a game like Super Mario Brothers. Now, of course, these games were not related in any way, and it's not like Miyamoto played Montezuma's Revenge and then programmed Super Mario Brothers. But people in tandem around the world, I think, we're starting to get a handle on the right way to do a jumping platformer, and this is an example of just that. I mean, I really, really like the way that your guy, the Panama Joe, coincidentally, he started out as Pedro. That was his first name. And then they changed his name to Panama Jack. But of course, Panama Jack, they didn't realize was actually a branded character for, I guess, a clothing line. Oh, yeah. So they had to change it finally to Panama Joe.
I kind of like Pedro myself.
Pedro is pretty cool. So, but anyway, this game is, I really think that it's sort of the first modern platform game that I can think of. I mean, 1984, I can't think of anything, because Pitfall, this is obviously an evolution of Pitfall. Yeah. Pitfall, I believe, came out in 1982, maybe 1983. But this takes it to the next level on every level. And it really hones in on the exploration and the controls, and nothing ever feels too frustrating. And that's a big deal for me. I'm just not one of these people that likes to beat themselves up over games. I'm definitely not a fan of the kind of flip screen platformers like you see, like your Monty on the Run, like your Jet Set Willy, stuff like that. This is a completely different game than that, although they are in the same genre.
I like both. I'm not. First of all, I was always a big fan of this game. The Atari had a wealth of great platform games, because this is right. You also had your stuff like your Miner 2049 and your Jumpmans.
Right.
And the funny thing about it, if you look at those three titles as examples, they're totally unrelated. I mean, they live beside each other in harmony. There's really, I mean, yeah, you jump in them, you know, but I mean, ultimately, they're totally different they each bring something special to the table. This game brought the big, beautiful graphics to the table, and I like the fact that you look over these different rooms and they unfold, and you look, and there's so much stuff going on. There's fire, conveyor belts, invisible stuff. There's just all kinds of stuff. It's almost like going to a kid's playground. You just get excited. You're like, look at all this stuff I get to do in this level. This came out around about the same time that Pitfall 2 came out, and Pitfall 2 was a natural progression of the first one. But if you compare these two games, and I love Pitfall 2, don't get me wrong, but I mean, this game took the Pitfall 2 or Pitfall 1 thing and amped it up. So I agree with you. This is an evolution, and this does feel does have the feel of a more modern platformer. Now, when you compare these to the European stuff, I mean, obviously we both sides of the pond have a different way of doing stuff. And there are some things I really love about the European games. You know, stuff like I wish this had named rooms and stuff like that. Right. That would make it a lot more fun because you can get into it a little bit more. But it goes back to what you want. Do you want sort of a laid back sort of game, or do you want something that's just soul crushing? You know, most people.
I'm gonna opt for not crushing.
Well,
myself,
most people commercially in the States, you would never release Manic Miner ever. That would never get a release. And I mean, it might get released, but no one would buy it because it's just too. People don't have the patience.
Well, I mean, and again, the question comes: was the only reason why it sold in Europe was because it was the only thing there?
Well, they were. I don't know.
You can't discount. You can't discount the number one. You've got sort of you've got the name behind the project, whether it's Matthew Smith or whatever. You've got the magazine coverage. You've got the fact that this is a homegrown deal. This is a guy from your country making games. These are teams from your country making games on a computer that you have, because most of the people, they're playing Spectrums and they're playing stuff like that. So there's a certain amount of, eating your own dog food that goes on with things like that. And you can't discount the fact that there's also, people, the games over there were cheap, like $3.99, $4.99. And I guarantee you, Parker Brothers wasn't selling Montezuma's Revenge for $4.99. This was a full-priced game.
Well, I think Manic Miner is a stone cold classic. I'm not gonna lie, because it puts you in a different place than this does. Again,
we're a bad place.
No, exactly. If you could, it's another game that if you compare it to Jumpman or this or Miner 24/9, there is no comparison. It's its own game. It stands on its own, and it just goes in a different route. And I like that. I mean, it brings something out of you. But this game, I also love. This is the kind of game you have to be in the right mood to play Manic Miner in 2021, right? This is the kind of game that it's a laid-back, easy-to-play game. It got ported a lot of stuff. You can play it on like ColecoVision, got a port, some other ports, C64, but it's a fun game. The characters are big and beautiful looking, and it's easier to approach than a game like Manic Miner or Jet Set Willy.
Utopia Software was approached by Nintendo to add this to the opening lineup of NES games.
Wow!
Around the time the console was released, unfortunately, they were not offering the kind of money that Parker Brothers were, and so he turned them down. He says that this was one of the biggest mistakes of his life.
How do you think this would have fared in that opening lineup, Boat?
Oh, I think it would have held its own, because remember, the NES, the thing about the NES is that out of the box, you're really pushing the abilities of the system with a game like this. I mean, Super Mario Brothers was the pinnacle of what you could do with standard NES hardware. After that, they started figuring out ways to add chips to the cartridges to enhance the ability of the NES. So this would have fit right in, especially if you look at some of those early Famicom games that didn't get a US release.
Right.
This would have fit right in with some of those.
But could this stand beside a Mario?
Well, it couldn't have stood beside a Mario, but it could have stood, slightly to the left and under Mario.
Can you see a future if this game had gotten released on the NES where you would have had Montezuma Strikes Back or Montezuma
absolutely,
Revenge?
Because once the money started coming in, because guess what the difference is when you release a game on the NES versus on a computer? 100% of the people that play the game have bought it. You
Yeah.
don't have the piracy issues that you have on the computers. So you're getting all this money coming in, and Nintendo starts coming around saying, hey, when are you going to do Montezuma 2? And bam, there you go. And who knows, Montezuma 2 probably would have looked a whole lot more like a modern 8-bit Nintendo style platformer than the first edition.
I will say, the poor fellow who didn't make that deal, no one knew. No one could
No.
possibly know the
And
kind of
everybody
action
that was in
Nintendo was
everybody
gonna
in
get
the industry at the time thought Nintendo was insane for
Yeah.
trying to market another games console.
in
So
the States. Yeah.
yeah,
It was
and so like you said, they offered nothing as far as advances or guaranteed sales. So they weren't exactly offering in the sun and the moon and the stars. So but that's just how life goes.
Yeah.
Now I'll tell you something interesting about this game, Aaron. In 2013, this was the sort of when AI was sort of not really making a big splash, but this was modern AI was starting to happen, and they were trying to program AI to play several different Atari 2600 games. And they made algorithms which could learn to play lots of different Atari 2600 games, but it failed on both Montezuma's Revenge and Pitfall. Now, it's pretty clear why that is. When you're teaching AI to play something like Asteroids, it's infinitely easier to write code to say, blow up the things as they come to you, versus negotiating, multiple enemies on screen doing different things, different behaviors. However, in 2016, Google DeepMind did learn to play Montezuma's Revenge. They programmed something called artificial curiosity into the AI, and they were able to defeat Montezuma's Revenge.
That's amazing to think about, that a computer could do it on its own. I mean, because there's a lot of, of course, I guess it would be immune to the timing issues and whatnot. But this game has a lot of stuff where the timing is real important, and consideration as to your next move, and so that's sort of scary, Bode.
It is.
To be completely honest with you.
Now, Aaron, before we leave Montezuma, we should probably talk about some of the different ports that were available for the system. Of course, this came out on both the Atari 8-bits, the C64, the ZX Spectrum, where it was just known simply as Panama Joe. But there's also a version of this game called Montezuma Redux that was released in 2020. Okay, and Montezuma Redux was a fan project that added a new explorer character, new skulls, new snakes, a new spider with separate sprites, new objects, animated swords and keys, modified walls. I mean, they've really taken the bones of this game and updated it with all of the advances in Atari 8-bit programming that have happened over the past 20 plus years. I played a little bit of this. I'm going to go back to it for sure. It's such a joy because it's the same game that we know and love, but it has all these little upgraded graphical tweaks. There are some small differences in gameplay, although I didn't really notice them because I don't know this game backwards and forwards. But if you have an Atari 8-bit and you're a fan of the original game, this is a free download. You can find it on Indie Retro News. Check it out. Give it a download. It's a lot of fun.
It looks they've definitely changed some of the textures. They've animated all the items. Panama Joe looks entirely different than he does. I'm looking at this and I'm not. I have to sit here and play it and decide if I can handle it, because I've gotten so used to the old graphics. I'm not sure I could go to the kick. Cool
what this reminds me of, Aaron? This reminds me of if this game would have come out on the NES, it probably would have looked more similar to this in terms of the sprite character himself. There's a lot more definition there that the NES could probably handle in a way that the Atari couldn't. It's a lot like Super Pitfall. We played that on the CoCo. It also got an NES release. It's a game that appeared on the NES, but really seemed out of time, in terms of what was going on at the same time. Yeah. But in terms of a, day one NES release as part of the Black Box series, I could definitely see a game like Redux coming out there.
Absolutely, Bode. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, as far as I can tell, we did not get any reviews for Montezuma's Revenge on our Discord channel, but this game, of course, reviewed very, very well in all of the major publications of the day. It's fondly remembered there is a Montezuma's Revenge Facebook group that Robert posts on. I guess at some point in the past, he actually has created a cabinet, a stand-up cabinet, Montezuma's Revenge arcade cabinet for I guess just for meme or whatever. But it has a bunch of artwork and stuff on it, and it was actually inspired by Mark Sunshine. Mark Sunshine is the name of the guy who appears on every title screen. He's the guy that gave Robert the idea to create Montezuma's Revenge. Pretty cool.
Yeah, neat.
And then there's just another couple of things, 2 interviews that if you are interested in hearing from Robert himself, more detail that we couldn't go into in this episode. One is the excellent Antic podcast, Atari 8-Bit podcast, hosted by Kay Savitz. He interviewed Robert, I believe, back in 2017, and a lot of the material, a lot of the anecdotes and stuff we talked about came from that interview. And then also Digital Press has an interview with Robert that they ran on their website that is also quite good. So there's a lot out there, a lot we didn't cover in terms of the background and everything. If you want to hear more from Robert, those are 2 great places to find those things. All right. So that's going to do it for this episode of 1200 XL. We are going to be covering, Aaron, another classic next time. We're going to be doing a little game I like to call Archer McLean's Drop Zone.
Oh, all right.
That's right. That's right. So we will see you next time for that. And until then, make sure you play
your Atari today.